Yeah, I heard that's sweet.
Okay, Slippy. Nice. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Deep
That's not how we
Dive
do the intro,
with-
Sarah.
What? I was doing the intro.
Okay, go ahead.
How would you like to do the intro?
No, it's your show. Go.
Take two. Welcome, everybody, to Deep Dives with Dave and Nick. But Dave's not here, so it's me. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Nick.
And we get to deep dive on the awesome sermon that Nick just did last Saturday? Sunday. It was Sunday.
We do have church on Sundays here.
We do. But speaking of Sundays as a day of rest, that's what you talked about.
That is what I talked about.
Sermon.
Yeah, we decided to do a mini series. So one of the fun things is that next week we'll switch seats and I'll get to interview Sarah. And we decided to go with lessons we learned from Chick-fil-A because why not?
Chick-fil-A is a valuable part of our community.
It is. What's your go-to Chick-fil-A order, Sarah?
I like the Cool Ranch wrap with French fries, and I have to have Chick-fil-A sauce. What's yours?
Well, right now it's the kids' grilled nugget meal.
Ah, because you like the toy?
That's right. No, I always get the ice cream cone. It's kind of a hack. You get all that for like $6.
It's a good decision.
Fries, nuggets, ice cream cone.
What's your sauce of choice?
Buffalo, of course. Just like the socks I had that you got me. But we need to get rolling.
Okay,
You
let's
ready?
get rolling. Today I get to ask you all the fun questions, and I'm so excited. But my first question for you is, why is rest important? Why does it actually matter?
Well, as I kind of talked about this a little bit in the sermon, and I'm not going to do a full sermon recap here. If you want to know kind of what was in the sermon, go watch the Sunday stream. You can find it on YouTube, the Facebook, or whatever. But one of the things that I did some research on and I was looking around as I was prepping for is it talks about how busy we are as kind of Americans these days. And where not so long ago, I think it was only like 40, 50 years ago, the average amount of sleep somebody would get is like 10 or 11 hours a night, and now it's like 6.
Which, when you said that on Sunday, I said, what does that feel like? And your daughter leaned over and went, amazing.
Yeah, that girl
She
can
knows.
sleep. That girl can sleep. But I use that as a way to kind of lead into this idea of like, we are not our whole selves when we're so tired that we need to rest, because as I thought about some of even my worst moments as a friend, husband, father, all those things, like I recognized that most of the time it was because I was like spiritually, emotionally, basically just exhausted from whatever life was throwing at me. Sometimes it wasn't even necessarily a lack of sleep, but I had 15 other things on my plate, and that one thing that the person did was like, just enough to kind of set me off there. So, I think over the years, something I realized is how important finding adequate rest is. And again, that's not always sleep. That's a lot of other things. We'll get into that maybe a little bit later. But it really led me into this need for Sabbath, because I think that's something in the church we've often talked about, but not really, well, at least in the church, in my experience. I'm not saying no churches do this, but we don't really talk about having this rest day. And I don't know if that's because culture basically is like, keep going, keep grinding, keep moving, you know what I mean? Or if it's maybe kind of a little bit of a forgotten practice in the faith, or maybe some people think it's not as important once Jesus came. I don't know. I kind of saw some of both of those arguments as I was looking through this, but at the end of the day, Sabbath was created at the very beginning, shown by God, that this is a natural rhythm of life for us is to work 6 days, which is still a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, I was thinking, man, I don't even want to work I'm trying to get to 4-day work weeks, not 7 or 6-day work weeks. But then on that last day to rest, and I love how in the Bible it says keep it holy, is that keep it set apart and all that good stuff. But I don't know necessarily why we don't do it more.
Yeah.
Why do you think?
I don't know, but I read through, you mentioned John Mark Comer
Yeah.
in your sermon, which he's fantastic. And I
Right.
read through his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And one of the points that he brought up in his book is the fact that taking a Sabbath day is actually one of the 10 Commandments.
Mm-hmm.
And we sit here and tout around the fact that, like, I've never murdered anybody, but also it's a commandment to rest, and we just do it.
Yeah, I think I heard a podcast of his, and he was saying that it's the only commandment that most of us brag about breaking.
Yeah.
You know, because nobody's like, I lied today! Yes, but people be like, I worked 60 hours this week. Can you believe I worked 60 hours or whatever, you know? So I think it is kind of a cultural thing, maybe.
Absolutely.
But,
and you told us in your sermon, like,
mm-hmm.
some ways for us to do Sabbath, and your very first one was for us to stop.
To stop.
Which is where I think the hardest part comes in.
Yeah.
The very first step of stopping.
Yeah. And I kind of wanted to ask you, actually. I know you're the question asker.
I am.
But because I kind of talked a little bit about it during the service and all that stuff, how big of a problem is this for you? Like, if you're to look at your own life, how hard is it for you to slow down and to stop or to take a break from your normal routines?
It's very hard. I'm a very extroverted person, and so I like being with people and doing things, and I don't like saying no when someone asks me to do something, because I feel like I'm going to miss out on whatever it is, whether it was like fun or just a life experience. Like, I don't want to say no.
Yeah. And
the stopping means that I'm not going to do those things for a day, and we're actually going to take a beat, and it's okay to miss that, but I don't want to, because I want those experiences and all of the things. And so the stopping is difficult. But I also think it's redefining what of those things that I'm saying yes to are actually bucket fillers. What of those things I can say yes to, like help pour into a Sabbath.
Yeah.
Because me spending an entire day at Six Flags because I want to go and be with my people is 0% filling for me at all. But if someone's going to ask me out to dinner at a fun new restaurant, that's 100% going to be filling for me, which makes sense to say yes for a Sabbath.
Right.
If it's something that's going to give back to me, we can say yes.
Yep.
But figuring out what those things are sometimes isn't easy.
Yeah, I think stopping is probably one of the worst or the hardest parts of all four of these things, because it requires us to say no, but to really put firm boundaries around our life. And I don't think we tend to like to do that because we kind of like to keep our options open per se or whatever. But I think I would argue, and I didn't say this in the sermon, but I think I would argue that if we're able to protect that time, the experiences we have in the 6 other days are going to be that much better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, when you set aside time to refill, re-energize, all that good stuff, you're going to be able to put more into not just your work and not just the grinds of the week, but also I think into your relationships.
Yeah.
You know, like, because I think for me, like, especially my relationships, you know, there's people in this world that, like, you know, including like Rachel, my girls, my family, stuff like that, that I want to be a positive person in their life. Mm-hmm. And I find that I have a hard time doing that if I'm never giving my space time to, and I like the word you use, bucket fill, like to get poured back into, to let it come back to me, just to kind of slow down, to rest. And I find that if I don't put my parameters around things, that I'm just going to run myself dry.
Yeah.
And I kind of use an illustration about a battery in the same way, like if you're a visual person, to kind of say, like, you know, your phone's going to die if it hits 0%.
Right. And
it's kind of a similar thing to us, is like, we are in bad spots if we let ourselves get that low.
Yeah.
And there are certain seasons of life, though. And I do want to acknowledge that for anybody listening or whatever, that stopping's not an option, you know, because you might have somebody who's in a medical emergency, or something serious is going on in life, or an accident happened, or who knows. There's a million things we could say here. But I would say in those times, it's also important to lean back into how can I help myself get through this with as much grace, whether that's bringing in other people, whether that's finding time to let somebody else take some of the reins so you can go sleep. You know what I mean? just find those people in your world. But
so you talked about having a family, and you talked about like being able to guard your spaces. What does that look like for you, or maybe you and Rachel as the parents, to help like guard spaces for your kids and create those boundaries? Because that's a lot of saying no for them sometimes, or no to doing things. How does that add into the whole stopping factor? Because a lot of the times people are like, well, my kids have to keep going on Saturdays, so I can't, or my kids are doing this, that, and the other.
right. Well, I'll be honest. This might be a little bit of the blind leading the blind, because it's a trial and error process for us at the moment. Especially as the kids are getting older, there's more specific things that they want to do, and the things that they want to do are asking for more and more of their time. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not just a one Saturday picnic here or class here. It's you got to do this 2 or 3 times a week. Mm-hmm. You got to practice this. If you want to do this well, or if you want to be the next level singer or whatever, you should try this out. It's hard. And I think the strategy with me and Rachel so far has just trying to be keeping open lines of communication with each other and just working through it as it comes. I feel like that's kind of a cop-out answer a little bit, because I think we should probably be a little more protective of our spaces in times. But, you know, like I'm currently in a season where I have multiple jobs. Mm-hmm. And I know you know that world as well. So, you know, where Sundays might be an easy day for the rest of my family to get their Sabbath in, especially like right after church. Normally that's kind of our slowest day. I'm going from here to another job. You know what I mean? Like to another church to help out. And so for me, it's kind of like we're working through like, okay, when we do have time to Sabbath, do we Sabbath all together? Do I take my 3 or 4 hours of Sabbath while they're gone on Friday morning? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, and trying to find what works for me. And not every season is like this, but that's currently the one we're in.
I don't think that that's like a cop-out answer. I think that that's a relatable answer that most people are going to be like, same. Because it's just the process of trying to figure it out. And part of that is what you talked about on Sunday when it comes to your personality and figuring out how you actually Sabbath based on your personality, whether it's your full day of Sabbath or your 5 minutes of Sabbath that you find in a week. How do you do that?
Well, actually, this is kind of, and Dave would be good here too, because I think Dave is a little bit like you in terms of like being like to be around people, but this is kind of a perfect pairing of what I'm talking about, even because, and I think you alluded to it already a little bit, is that you're a more extroverted person.
Yes.
And when you're with meaningful relationship, whether that's at a concert, you know, going out to eat, you mentioned earlier, or whatever, that is very filling to you. That is very energizing to you. Where me, I love a good concert. I love being with good people. But my rest happens like when I have time to kind of woo-saw. I'm not even necessarily like a napper. Rachel, my wife, big napper.
I love it.
But that's not even really me. But just being able to kind of pull away and honestly sometimes find that place of solitude where like it's just me. Like those things become filling to me because it gives me space to kind of either process through the things I need to process through or whatever, so that I can kind of know how I'm going to work in those spaces later.
Yeah.
But how does it fill you up? Because for somebody like me on this side, like it just feels like another couple hours. I feel like I have to kind of be, I hate using this terminology, but like be on. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I have to be the person that I'm hoping everybody sees me as or whatever. And I mean, as somebody who's like in a church and you're a minister too, like you definitely feel like you kind of have to be on sometimes a little more than maybe you're feeling it or whatever. But like, how does that fill you up? Like, how does that not just drain you?
That's funny because you're like, I need solitude, and if I have a day where I don't see anybody and I'm like by myself, I took my first solo vacation last year and I was like, I'm dying because I I don't even need to be like talking with people or on with people. You said, and it's very true, that like I need to have people that I have quality relationships with.
Yeah.
Those are my people I find rest with. And sometimes it's just the act of being in the same room with them. We don't have to be talking. We don't have to be doing anything, or we could. But it's the being with the people does something for my soul. It just fills it back up. Because I, Sarah, this is probably not true for all extroverts, I don't know, but I, Sarah, feel like it is a wasted day when I'm by myself, that I could have been with other people. That's just what makes me happy. It's what I love to do. So I find my people and I go to them. And if I have a gap in my week, chances are I'm texting somebody and I'm like, can I just come sit at your house? Is that okay? We don't have to go to dinner. We don't have to do anything big, but it's the peopling that helps to just fill me right back up.
Yeah.
But I have people in my life that are like you, who they prefer their own solitude. They like to be alone. That's how they fill back up. And I can tell you that, like, all throughout college, having these friendships was so difficult to manage with people like that because I didn't take time to sit and understand.
Right.
You fill up differently than I do. And now that I've learned so much from them, I can see the spaces where I'm like, you need to take your own time, and that's okay. Like, you take your space. But learning that about each other is super important, because if you don't know who the other, or how the other people in your life fill up, like,
Right.
you can't help them. You can't make spaces for them to Sabbath.
And you do that well, and I can say that because we vacation together. I mean, we hang out quite often through the year, but also, like, we vacation, and you're in a house most of the time with people who are more on that, like,
Yes.
give me a little bit of alone time, and then we can kind of we can do the funsies. But so finding those spaces, I think, is important. But all that is to say is just a reminder to all of us that when we're talking about Sabbath, when we're talking about resting, that you got to find what's going to be restful for you.
Yeah.
And this might be a trial and error process for you as well. Like, you might try something and realize, man, I am drained. You might try something and feel like that really filled me up. Do the things that fill you up more than the things that drain you. That's really kind of the catch here, and start where you can. That's kind of the big thing.
Yeah. And so the things that you gave us to do, you said that Sabbath is to stop, rest, delight, and worship.
Yeah.
So we covered pretty much the first three: figuring out how to stop, finding what you need to do to rest. Clearly you delight in it because it fills you back up.
Yeah.
Where does worship play into that? How does that play into it?
I think it's kind of the culmination of the first three. And I found a quote, and I don't have the quote in front of me, but to kind of sum it up, it kind of talks about how, resting gives you the space to feel joy again. Feeling that joy gives you that chance to delight. And then because you're so joyful, because you're delighting, it just leads you straight to God. That gratitude brings you straight to the throne and gives you an opportunity to be like, thank you, God, for just being there, for taking care of me, for loving me. And I think worship, we tend to just associate it with singing or what happens on a Sunday morning service. And yes, that's part of it. I will not deny that. That is absolutely a big part of it. That's what it should be about, is centering in on God in the middle of that week or at the end of the week, and giving Him back all that He has given to us. That's what worship is. But it's not just simply what happens 1 hour in a service or an hour and a half or whatever, And I think that's where we kind of have to acknowledge, like, where are the places that we're using our gifts and talents for God, and recognizing those are the acts of worship. Where are we seeing the goodness of our week and going, man, God, thank you for blessing me with good friends to have coffee with, or thank you for blessing me for the ability to have the energy to go do this or that. I think too often we don't focus in or recognize the worship when it's worship. I think often when you look at it in the Bible, you see so many different elements of it, but rarely is it 10 guys singing in a circle with a guitar or anything like that. It's never that. It's setting up altars and thanking God for the place they're at. Even if they were stranded in a desert for many, many years, setting up this altar and thanking God for the fact that people are still alive, for the food that has been provided. Like, these are acts of worship, these holy ground spaces that are created in the middle of these people's lives. And, why don't we do that more in ours?
Yeah.
And I think this follows the delight part, because I argued that delight is really about looking for that good and seeing the good and retraining our brain. And if we're able to do that, worship comes so easily.
Yeah.
Because we know where it came from.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think when we can get to that spot, like joy just overflows.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any alternate ways that you have found that you worship God along the way, like in the middle of something?
As you were talking, it came back to memory for me that when the youth group kids all went on summer mission trip this summer, it was a very silly moment, but it was just the purest moment. We all went to a monastery, and we got there, and well, it wasn't going to open for another hour. So we had to find a way to bide our time, and some of the kids stayed up on the field playing games, and then there was a few of us that went and we walked a little ways, and there were these cats that just, I guess they feed there and they roam, and it was a moment. And one of the kids got to sit down, and he was sitting there petting the cat, and he just looked up and he went, "This is where I see God today." And it was a moment of shifting of, it doesn't have to be complicated to see God in a day. Actually, just being able to sit and pet a cat was a moment for him to be grateful, a moment of worship for him, as silly as petting a cat can be. But it was something so pure and so lovely. That's just where I see God today. It's he showed up and he gave me a little fuzzy buddy.
Do you think that we just overcomplicate faith?
1,000% yes.
Yeah.
1,000% yes.
Why would you say that? Just curious.
Because I actually just had this conversation with a friend of mine at dinner the other night. That growing up, there was just so much that we had to put into faith, and there was so much expected of us, and we were acted to behave and perform all these certain ways. But when you read through the Gospels, it was so easy. Jesus was "Come and follow me." That was it. He would ask them to go into town and get food and come back. It was just an average life, but because they loved Jesus well, they were able to live out a good life, serving him. Yeah. And we make it too difficult when we say you have to be here and you have to do these things and you have to. There's so much of it that does get in the way of our rest. Mm-hmm. It prevents us from having moments of pause in our week to sit and worship and to have a moment with God. It's really not that complicated. Yeah. It can be in a car. It can be walking a street. It could be when you're just having a moment yourself, The worship can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah.
It can be super simple. But I think we all have to relearn and be retrained in what simplicity looks like in our lives. And I think that's a good starting point, which is my last question that I have for you, is how do you start small with Sabbathing? Mm-hmm. And finding easy ways to worship is a great spot to start. Yeah. Because I think once we get a taste of the worship, we want so much more of it. And we're willing to say no to more things, and we're willing to stop, and we're willing to pause when we see the good outcome from it. Yeah. But we just have to get there.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said, because you kind of said some of the key words in my head as I was thinking about it. Just right here, right now, is I think willingness to follow God in our faith, to set aside even Sabbath, is having the willingness to try is a big part. And then you have this idea of remembering, because you got to remember this rhythm of life to set it aside. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then we keep using the word practice, and it's putting what you're learning into practice. And I think that's essentially what the disciples did at the beginning. They were willing to learn. They were willing to try. They remembered it in the middle of it, and then they practiced. Yeah. And sometimes when they practiced, Jesus would come up and be like, "You're an idiot." You know what I mean?
Peter.
yes. I didn't want to say the name, but no.
We all know who it is.
Exactly.
He was now Jesus' most beloved disciple.
That's right. But still, a man who the church was built on after right? Yeah.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So it's like Peter and Paul, right? You know what I'm saying? But I think starting Sabbath where you can is the biggest thing. To kind of sum up your question is don't, if 24 hours is not feasible for you, don't do it. build up to that. If this is something that you find becomes a valuable part of your week, that you find the space to worship God, to remember God, to find that joy, to find that rest, that's when you start adding to it. Not because of it's doing something for you, but more of you're seeing the fruits of the practice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To where you want to go and do it more and more. And I think even, I am a sports guy. I hate that I use a lot of sports analogies because I know people who are not sports people, it probably drives you crazy. But I think you could probably relate is like when you're really into something, and even if you start slow and practice, like you're doing a practice of like, for me, it was hitting a baseball, right? My first hits were grounders. And then that first time I got that line drive, it made me want to practice more, so I got more of those. And then when my line drive turned into a home run, I wanted to practice even more so I could hit more of those.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think it's a similar thing with instruments. I think it's a similar thing in other places. Is like get the habit into your life. So it might just be Saturday morning. You've got 4 hours that you know that I can block off because I don't have anything in my kids' schedule, or none of my friends are playing bridge at that time, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you just know that it's open, and start there. Start by lighting a candle to recognize you're entering a space of Sabbath, and then go for it. Mm. And then if you're done after 4 hours, okay, pack it up, go on about your day. But hopefully that 4 hours eventually turns into 6, and that 6 eventually turns into 8, and that 8 into 24. You know what I mean? Like. Yeah. And that's not the metric for everybody. That's just a random set of numbers. But don't be overwhelmed. Don't let it be something that overwhelms you. It might be something you have to prepare for because you don't want to think about cooking 3 meals in the middle of Sabbath. So you might need to prep that the day before, right? Because you want to be able to enjoy Sabbath. This is I talked about this in the delight in the sermon is it's kind of that treat yourself day. Is like, yes. Let it be part of the goodness of your week. Like, if you're like, hey, I really want to eat healthy, but I love a piece of cake, have that piece of cake on that day. Yeah. I'm not saying eat 10 pieces of cake that day. I'm saying you have that piece of cake and go, this was good. Yeah. And then go back to it. You know what I mean? Like, this is the beauty of what Sabbath can be, because it could just be that day that you know you need, but you're never making space for it. Yeah. Because of you're busy, because your kids are busy, because everything else. But if this becomes a true practice that you're going to work at, I truly believe that it'll bring more energy, more joy to your life. So
awesome. Well, Nick, it is time to wrap it up.
Okay.
Do you have any last final thoughts for us before we leave?
No, I do not. I guess the only thing I would say is this was like a hyper overview of practicing Sabbath. So if this is something that seemed interesting, but you're like, I would love some more information, shoot me a text, shoot me an email. I'd love to resource you guys. We mentioned a guy named John Marcomer. He does a really in-depth study. And honestly, I pulled some of his stuff and reworded it to how I would say it. Like, it's great. It's fantastic stuff. I can send it to you. It's free. It's a crowdsourced thing, so it's already kind of paid for. They put it out there for the world because they know how good it is. And I'd love to get that to you. So just shoot me a text, shoot me an email. If you got a group of people who are like, I'd love to talk about this with a bunch of other people. Because accountability is important. And it will push you to do more than you might just do yourself. Yeah. We can get a small group started, set up for you guys. It's real easy stuff, I promise. The teaching guides are word for word. You can use their stuff verbatim, and it'd be great. But that would be the only thing I'd add. I have a question for you, though, Timmons. Oh. Do you want to give a preview of what you're going to talk about?
Do I?
Yeah.
So my lesson from Chick-fil-A is hospitality. It's my pleasure. Mm-hmm. We are going to redefine hospitality and what it legitimately looks like and should be.
Okay. Right on. I'm excited about it.
I'm preaching from an armchair, though, so that I'm excited about.
Yeah.
Very
I'm jealous that I didn't think of that. Like, why not sit in a comfortable chair in front of people? Jeez.
Nick would like to preach again the following week, so he can have his
experience. The following? Oof. Maybe.
Maybe. Figure it out. Awesome.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for coming on the podcast. I know this isn't your normal routine, but we appreciate you stepping in for Dave while he's out in Barcelona and cruising Europe and all that good stuff. But while we're holding the fort down, we'll be back next week together.
We will be back next week together.
And you know where to find all this stuff. If you got any questions or anything to add to it, you can drop it in the comments below on Facebook, on YouTube.